I never told my son. I make $80,000 a month. His wife screamed, "Get out, you beggar. We don't need you." My son threw my things out the door. A month later, I bought the house across the street. When he saw my name on the deed, good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story until the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Ellis, and I was 68 years old when my son threw my suitcase onto the front porch like it was a bag of old newspapers. But let me start before that night. Let me start where things still felt, at least on the surface, like family. I had spent most of my adult life quietly building something. After my husband, Harold, passed, God rest him, I was 51 years old, alone in our house in Boise, Idaho, with a mortgage, a garden, and absolutely no plan to sit down and grieve myself to death. Harold had been a careful man, a saver, and he left me with a foundation. I built the rest myself. I started with an online resale business, vintage furniture, estate finds, things people threw away that still had life in them. Then I grew it into digital consulting for small antique dealers who had no idea how to sell online. By the time I was 65, I was making close to $80,000 a month. Not a year, a month. I never told anyone, not my neighbors, not my church friends, and certainly not my son Daniel. I want to be clear about why. Harold always said, money changes the people around you before it changes you. I had seen it happen to his sister when she inherited their mother's estate. I didn't want people to look at me differently. I didn't want to become a wallet with a grandmother's face. So, I lived simply. I drove a 2017 Honda CR-V. I wore clothes from Costco and, once in a while, something nicer from Chico's. My house in Boise was paid off, simple, and full of plants. Daniel was my only child. We were close, or at least I thought we were close, until he married Brittany Caldwell 4 years ago. Brittany was 34, 12 years younger than Daniel. And she had a way of standing in a room that made it seem like she was always measuring the square footage. She was not unkind in the beginning. She was careful. There is a difference. An unkind person lets you see their sharp edges. A careful person keeps them hidden until the moment they decide you are no longer useful. The first warning sign came 6 months into their marriage during Thanksgiving. I had driven up to their home in Portland, a lovely craftsman house Daniel had bought before Brittany, thank God, and I noticed that the photo of Harold and me from Daniel's college graduation had been moved from the living room mantel to a closet shelf. When I asked Daniel about it, he said Brittany was changing the aesthetic. I smiled and helped with the cranberry sauce. The second warning sign came the next Easter. Brittany made a comment at dinner, lightly, with a laugh, the way people say things they mean, about how it must be so hard living alone on a fixed income. I was sipping my iced tea. I said nothing. Fixed income. I was running 4 income streams at the time. The third warning sign came when Daniel called me in October and gently suggested, carefully, the way Brittany had taught him to be gentle and careful, that I think about selling my Boise house and moving in with them. They had a guest room. It would be easier for everyone. I should have heard the word easier and asked, easier for whom? But I was lonely. That is the truth I am not ashamed of. Harold had been gone 17 years, and the evenings were long, and Daniel was my son, my boy, the child I had raised mostly alone after Harold's first heart attack left him only half present for years. I said yes. I moved to Portland in January. I brought my plants, my laptop, my external hard drives. My whole business lived on those drives. And 2 boxes of Harold's things I could not part with. I paid no rent. I offered to, over and over. Daniel said it wasn't necessary. Brittany said nothing, which I later understood was her loudest language. The first 3 weeks were pleasant enough. Then the pleasantness started to wear thin. Brittany began making comments about my schedule. I worked early mornings, 4 to 8 a.m., before the house woke up. She said the sound of my keyboard carried. I bought a quieter keyboard. She said the light from my laptop bothered her when she walked past the hallway. I started working with the door closed. She said she could hear me on calls. I started using earphones and whispering. I was shrinking. I could feel it. And still I told myself, she is adjusting. This is new for everyone. Daniel loves you. Give it time. Then came the evening of March 14th. I had been on a call with a client in London. It ran long, 20 minutes past what I had planned. When I came out of the guest room, Brittany was standing in the hallway. Her arms were crossed. Daniel was behind her, and I noticed he was not looking at me. Margaret, Brittany said. She never called me Mom. Not once. We need to talk about boundaries. I said, of course, and I followed them to the kitchen. What happened next took 11 minutes. I counted them later while lying awake, because that is what you do when your mind needs to measure a wound. Brittany talked about how this arrangement wasn't working. How I was always in the way, how the guest room was actually supposed to become a home office for her growing candle business. How they had been more than generous. And then she said it, the thing from the title of the story, the thing I will never forget for as long as I live. You're a poor woman living off our hospitality. We don't need a penniless old lady taking up space in our home. Pack your things. I looked at my son. Daniel looked at the kitchen floor, and then he walked to the guest room, and I heard him pulling my suitcase out from under the bed. I stood in that kitchen for exactly the amount of time it took me to decide I would not cry in front of Brittany Caldwell. That was the only decision I made in those first 60 seconds. Everything else, the grief, the disbelief, the special pain of watching my son refuse to meet my eyes, I folded up and put somewhere behind my sternum. The way you press a letter into an envelope when you are not ready to send it yet. Daniel set my suitcase by the front door. Then he went back for my laptop bag. Then the 2 boxes of Harold's things. He stacked them neatly on the porch, which somehow made it worse. The neatness of it, the care he took arranging my whole life in a 4-foot pile on painted wood. It was 41 degrees outside. I know because I checked my phone as I stood there, because my mind was doing what it always does under pressure, collecting facts. Brittany had not followed us to the door. She was already back in the kitchen. I could hear her filling the kettle. Mom, Daniel said. He was still not looking at me. I'm sorry. This is just. It's not working. You said that, I replied. You can call me when you get settled. I picked up my laptop bag. I lifted the suitcase handle. I looked at my son, this man I had driven to every soccer practice, every orthodontist appointment, who I had held at 2 a.m. when Harold's heart gave out the first time and Daniel was 16 and terrified. And I said very quietly, I will. Then I walked to my Honda and I drove. I drove for 20 minutes without knowing where I was going, which is not like me. I am a woman who has had a destination for most of her adult life. But that night, Portland moved past my windows like a city I had never seen before. All wet streets and yellow light, and I just drove until I found myself in the parking lot of a Marriott courtyard near the Lloyd District. I checked in for 3 nights. I paid cash from the emergency envelope I kept in my laptop bag. Harold's habit had passed to me. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I allowed myself exactly 45 minutes to feel everything. I cried for Harold first. I always do in the worst moments, because he would have known what to say and how to say it and exactly when to put his hand on mine. Then I cried for Daniel. Not the man who had stacked my boxes on a 41 degrees porch, but the boy I had raised, who I was now not sure I recognized. Then I cried for myself, briefly and practically, because I have never seen self-pity as a useful long-term activity. At the 46-minute mark, I washed my face, opened my laptop, and started a new document. I titled it, "What is True?" This is something I learned in business and in grief. When everything feels chaotic, you start with the facts. So, I wrote them down. What is true? I am 68 years old. I am in good health. I have no mortgage. My business generated $79,400 last month. I have $2.3 million in savings and investments. I have been told I am a burden by a woman who has never asked me a single question about my life. My son did not defend me. I read it back twice. Then I wrote one more line. What is also true? I do not have to accept this as the end of anything. I spent the next 3 days in that hotel room doing two things at once, grieving and planning. I let them run side by side. In the mornings, I worked, client emails, invoices, a new product listing for a Victorian secretary desk I had found in October. In the afternoons, I made calls. I found a furnished apartment in the Irvington neighborhood, 2 miles from Daniel and Brittany's house, available month to month. I signed the lease on day 3. It was a good apartment. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a kitchen window that looked out at a maple tree. I paid 6 months up front, which made the landlord clearly relieved and completely uninterested in asking questions. I moved in with my suitcase, my laptop, my drives, and Harold's boxes. I bought groceries. I bought a new plant, a pot hose, because they survive anything. And I put it in the kitchen window. And then I sat in my new living room on a rented couch, and I let myself think, not feel, think. Here is what I thought about Brittany's face when she said, "Penniless old lady." The exact satisfaction in it. The way she had said it, like she was giving a decision she had prepared long before. And I thought about Daniel's silence, which was its own kind of decision. They had decided who I was. They had built a version of me, small, dependent, a charity case in their craftsman house, and they had thrown out that version. The problem for them was that the version they had built had nothing to do with who I really was. And that gave me an idea, a very exact, very deliberate idea. I opened my laptop and went to Zillow. I typed in Daniel and Brittany's street address, Sycamore Lane, Portland, Oregon, and I looked at what was for sale in their neighborhood. There was one listing that made me stop scrolling. Directly across the street from their craftsman home, I could see it in the listing photos, their blue front door visible in the background, was a 3-bedroom bungalow, gray with white trim, a covered porch, a big maple in the front yard, listed at $687,000, available immediately, vacant, seller motivated. I looked at that listing for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my financial advisor. "Barbara," I said, "I need to talk about a real estate purchase." "Of course," she said. "Investment property, personal residence." I said. And I gave her the address on Sycamore Lane. Barbara and Juan had been my financial advisor for 11 years, and in that time she had learned not to ask me why I wanted something, only whether the numbers worked. "Give me 24 hours, she said. "I'll pull the comps and look at your liquidity position." "I already know my liquidity position," I said. "I need you to confirm that the purchase won't create any tax problems if I use the investment account." She paused. "Margaret, that's a significant withdrawal." "I know what it is, Barbara." Another pause. "Then I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning." I thanked her and hung up. Then I called a real estate attorney named Patricia Howe, whom I had found through the Oregon State Bar's referral directory. I had met Patricia once, briefly, at a Chamber of Commerce event 3 years earlier when I was scouting Portland as a possible base for my business. She was precise and unhurried, which are the two qualities I need most in a lawyer. I explained the situation in broad strokes. I wanted to buy a specific property. I planned to pay cash, and I needed the transaction handled with complete privacy about the buyer's identity until closing. That's not unusual for cash purchases, Patricia said. We can use a trust or LLC as the purchasing entity. A trust? I said. The Harold Ellis Family Trust. I had set up that trust 8 years earlier for estate planning. Harold's name on it still gave me a special kind of comfort, as though he were still co-signing my decisions from wherever he had gone. Patricia said she would begin the paperwork. I asked how quickly we could close if the seller was motivated. Cash, no contingencies, motivated seller. 3 weeks, maybe 2. Make it 2, I said. Over the next days, I moved quietly. I drove past Sycamore Lane twice, not in front of the gray bungalow, but through the alley behind it so I could look at the property from different angles. The bones were excellent. The roof looked newer. The backyard was overgrown, but had potential. There was a detached garage that I noted could serve as a workspace. The listing agent was a young man named Tyler who seemed truly confused that a cash buyer had appeared within 48 hours of the listing going live. I let him be confused. I asked practical questions. Age of the HVAC system. Any history of foundation issues? HOA status. No HOA. Good. I did not drive past Daniel and Brittany's blue front door. I did not need to. I had the listing photos, and in one of them, the wide shot of the bungalows outside taken from the street, I could see their porch clearly, the 2 rocking chairs they kept there. The hanging fern Brittany was so proud of. The fern looked healthy. It would not for much longer, I guessed. But that wasn't something I spent much time thinking about. It was during the second week of this process, while Patricia was finishing the purchase agreement and Barbara had confirmed the capital transfer, that I got the information that changed everything from a matter of dignity into a matter of record. I had a friend, Carol Simmons, 71, a retired schoolteacher who had lived 3 doors down from Daniel and Brittany for 6 years. Carol and I had met at Daniel's housewarming party before Brittany had fully taken control, and we had stayed in touch, monthly coffee when I visited Portland, occasional texts. Carol called me on a Thursday evening. "Margaret," she said without any greeting. "I don't know if I should be telling you this." "Tell me," I said. Carol had been at a neighborhood book club 2 nights earlier. Brittany had not attended. Brittany never attended, but a woman named Sandra, who lived next door to Daniel and Brittany, had. And Sandra, apparently loosened up by 2 glasses of Chardonnay, had mentioned something she thought everyone already knew. Brittany had been planning Margaret's removal since October. Not since the boundaries talk in the hallway. Since October, 4 months before it happened. 4 months before I arrived with my plants and my laptop and Harold's boxes. Sandra had heard it directly from Brittany herself during a backyard conversation over the fence in November. Brittany had told Sandra that Daniel's mother's situation would be resolved by spring. She had described the guest room as already spoken for, her candle business, the home office, the plan she had laid out to Daniel. She said, and Sandra repeated this carefully because she had found it striking at the time, she'll have no choice. She sold her house. Where is she going to go? I sat very still on my rented couch. I had sold my Boise house in December, 3 months after Brittany had made that calculation. I had sold it because Daniel had slowly convinced me over several conversations that I would not need it anymore, that Portland was home now, that they wanted me there. Those conversations had begun in September, 1 month before Brittany told Sandra the situation would be resolved by spring. I understood now. The invitation had not been an invitation. It had been a plan to secure me. Get the old woman to sell her house, take away her exit, then remove her on a timeline of our choosing. I asked Carol if Sandra would be willing to write down what she had heard and sign it. I think she would, Carol said quietly. She felt terrible when she found out what happened to you. She didn't know it had already been done. Can you ask her for me? Yes, Carol said. Margaret, are you all right? I looked at the pothose in my kitchen window. It had put out 2 new leaves since I brought it home. I am better than all right, I said. I am informed. 2 days later, I had a signed, dated, notarized statement from Sandra Polson, 47, of Sycamore Lane, Portland, Oregon, confirming the conversation she had witnessed between Brittany Ellis and herself in November on the subject of Margaret Ellis's planned removal from the family home. Patricia added it to the file she was building. And on a gray Tuesday morning in early April, I signed the closing papers for the Harold Ellis Family Trust's purchase of 14 Sycamore Lane, Portland, Oregon. The property directly across the street from my son's blue front door. I drove to the closing. I signed everything. I accepted the keys from Tyler, who still looked mildly confused. I drove to the property, unlocked the front door, walked through the empty rooms that smelled of old wood and possibility. I stood at the living room window and looked across the street. I could see their porch, the rocking chairs, the hanging fern. I thought, Daniel, when you see my name on that mailbox, I want you to understand something. This isn't revenge. This is a woman you underestimated showing you the cost of that mistake. Then I went to measure the windows for curtains. I did not rush the move. I had learned in 68 years that the best actions are the ones done without urgency, because urgency makes you sloppy, and sloppiness gives other people leverage. I hired a small moving company, 2 young men named Josh and Marcus who worked efficiently and didn't ask personal questions. And over one Saturday, my life moved from the Irvington apartment to 14 Sycamore Lane. I had bought several pieces of furniture in the weeks between. A proper bed, a reading chair, a desk for my work setup, a kitchen table with 4 chairs that I would probably only ever use for myself, but wanted anyway, because a table with 4 chairs says something different about a life than a table with 1. I had also bought new curtains, linen, cream-colored ones for the living room windows that faced the street. I did not open those curtains on moving day. I wasn't ready for that yet. The discovery happened on Sunday morning, 31 hours after the moving truck left. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a car door close in a way that carried meaning. Not the casual thump of a neighbor leaving for church, but the sharp, clear slam of someone who had just seen something that made them forget to be careful. I looked through the kitchen window, which faced the side yard, and saw nothing. Then I heard footsteps on my porch. The knock was loud, the kind that is just barely not a bang. I took my coffee with me to the door. I was wearing my good navy cardigan, the one with the brass buttons, because I had dressed properly that morning, as I always do. Another of Harold's lessons. How you dress tells you what kind of day you're going to have. I opened the door. Daniel and Brittany stood on my porch. Daniel looked like a man who had just discovered the ground was not where he thought it was. His face was doing 3 things at once: confusion, something almost like fear, and under that, rising anger. Brittany's face was doing only one thing. Brittany's face was doing what it always did, calculating. "Mom," Daniel said. It was the first time I had heard his voice since he carried my boxes to a 41 degrees porch. "Daniel," I said. "Brittany." I did not offer them a smile. I did not offer them anything. I held my coffee with both hands and waited. "What is this?" Brittany said. Her voice was controlled, but barely. "What are you doing?" "I live here," I said. "You bought this house?" Daniel said. "The Harold Ellis Family Trust did." "Yes." A pause. Brittany's eyes moved from my face to the inside of the house behind me, taking inventory, assessing, adding up what she saw and what it meant. I watched her do it. "This is," "This is insane," she said. Then the control slipped just a little, and what came through was not anger, but something closer to panic dressed up as anger. "You can't do this. You can't just move across the street from us." "I'm not aware of any law that prevents it," I said. "Are you?" Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, this isn't. You're trying to make a point. I understand, but this is too far. You need to think about what you're doing." "I thought about it very carefully," I said, "over several weeks." "We want you to sell it," Brittany said. "We'll help you find something somewhere in Portland. Somewhere comfortable, but not." She gestured at the street, at the 12 yards between my porch and her blue front door. "Not here." "No, thank you," I said. Brittany's composure finally left her. It didn't leave slowly. It left all at once, the way a storm breaks. "You're doing this to punish us," she said, her voice rising. "You're a vindictive old woman, and you're doing this to make our lives miserable, and I will not allow it. Do you hear me? I will not allow it." "Brittany," Daniel said quietly, but not to stop her, to warn her, which told me he could see what I could see, that she had lost the room. "You have no friends here," Brittany went on. "You have no community here. Nobody on this street wants a bitter old woman sitting in her window watching their house. You'll be miserable and alone. And when you finally come to your senses." "Brittany." This time, Daniel's voice had more edge in it. She stopped. She was breathing hard. I looked at my son. I said, "I have a document signed and notarized by a neighbor on this street confirming a conversation in which your wife said that my removal from your home was planned 4 months before it happened. During that same period, you were encouraging me to sell my house in Boise. I shared that document with my attorney. It is in a file. I want you to know that it exists." The porch went very quiet. Daniel's face did something then that I had not expected. It cracked, not in rage, in something that briefly looked like shame. Brittany was staring at me. The calculating look was back in her eyes, but it was moving slower now. Something had jammed the machine. "You have 2 choices," I said. "You can leave my porch and we can be neighbors, which will require nothing from you except basic polite behavior, or you can keep taking this conversation in a direction that I promise you will find much more uncomfortable. What would you like to do?" They left. I closed my door. I went back to the kitchen, poured out the coffee that had gone cold, and stood at the sink for a long moment with both hands gripping the edge of the counter. My heart was beating faster than I would have liked. I was 68 years old, and I had just stood my ground against my son and the woman who had planned my homelessness, and I had done it cleanly. But the body does not always know the difference between winning and being in danger. My hands were shaking slightly. I allowed that. I spent the next 4 days doing almost nothing. I planted the backyard, bulbs, early perennials, some herbs along the fence. I read 3 novels. I watched the maple in my front yard change its light through the day. I did the minimum necessary for my business, and I let my clients and auto-responses handle the rest. I wasn't hiding, I was recovering. There is a very important difference. On the 5th day after the porch confrontation, a basket appeared on my doorstep. It was a handsome basket. Wicker lined with gingham, filled with artisan items. A jar of local honey. 2 candles in amber glass. A packet of special tea. A small card in Brittany's handwriting that said, "Neighbors can have a fresh start, too." I looked at the basket for a long time. Then I took a photo of it, card and all, and sent the image to Patricia Howe with a note, for the file. I brought the basket inside because the honey was good quality and I saw no reason to waste it. But I did not respond to the card. 2 days after the basket, Daniel called. I let it ring. Then I listened to the voicemail because I needed to know what tone he was using. His voice was careful, apologetic in sound, but not quite apologetic in meaning, the difference between a person who is sorry and a person who is acting sorry in hopes of getting a certain result. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking a lot. I want you to know that I hear you. I know things got out of hand. Brittany and I have talked, and we think maybe we all started off on the wrong foot. Can we try to move forward? I love you. Call me back." Started off on the wrong foot, as if he had stepped on my shoe at a party. As if I had not been deliberately maneuvered out of my home and my stability through months of planning. As if the notarized document did not exist. I did not call back. Not that day and not the next. What I did instead was knock on Carol Simmons's door. Carol lived at number 8 Sycamore Lane, 3 houses down from Daniel and 2 houses down from me. She opened the door in a flour-dusted apron and immediately stepped aside to let me in, which is the kind of person Carol is. She doesn't wait to decide if she is glad to see you. She's already glad before you finish knocking. We sat in her kitchen, which smelled of baking and old wood and the special warmth of a house that has been truly lived in. She made tea without asking whether I wanted some. She put out a plate of shortbread. I told her everything, not the financial details, I am still a private woman, but everything about the basket and the voicemail and the signed statement and the house. Carol listened without interrupting, which is also rare and worth noting. When I finished, she set down her teacup and said, "You know what you did? You named yourself on that street, and names matter." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Brittany has been the one who defined you on this block since before you even moved in with them. She told people you were Daniel's elderly mother who needed looking after. She did it kindly, Margaret. She's good at kindness as a tool, but she defined you. And now you've shown up across the street in your own house with brass buttons on your cardigan, and you're defining yourself, and that frightens her." I thought about that. Carol introduced me to 3 other neighbors over the next week, naturally, through walks and front yard conversations, and one spontaneous invitation to a Sunday potluck that 6 households on the block attended. There was Sandra, of course, who greeted me with the special warmth of someone relieved to see you looking well. There was Jim, 64, a retired engineer who lived on the corner and seemed quietly delighted by anyone with strong opinions and a good handshake. There was Maria, 48, who ran a daycare from her home and watched everything on the street with a calm, complete attention that I respected immediately. I did not speak about Daniel and Brittany directly. I didn't need to. I was simply present. I was a neighbor. I went to the potluck. I brought a lemon cake. I listened more than I spoke, and I let the street form its own opinion of me apart from the one Brittany had been loading into it. It was at that potluck that Jim said, in the way people say things that are both casual and deliberate, "Nice to finally meet you properly, Margaret. Daniel's been saying you were unwell. You seem like you're doing just fine." "What did Daniel say I was?" I asked pleasantly. Jim glanced toward number 11, Daniel's house, and then back at me. "Struggling," he said. "He mentioned you'd had some financial difficulties." I smiled. I took a small sip of my lemonade. "How interesting," I said. And I said nothing else about it because I didn't need to. The house across the street said everything. I could tell from Jim's expression that he was already changing what he thought he knew. Later that evening, I sat on my covered porch as the street quieted down for the night. The maple was doing something beautiful with the last of the light. I could see Daniel and Brittany's living room window, lit from inside, their shapes moving now and then behind the frosted glass. I was not watching them with malice. I want that to be clear. I was watching the way you watch weather. Not to control it, but to understand it. The basket had been Brittany's first test, the voicemail Daniel's. Neither had worked. They would try again. People who are used to getting their way through control rarely stop neatly when the first attempt fails. They adjust. I was ready to have them adjust against me. In fact, I was counting on it. They came on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the basket. I had been expecting them, not on that exact Saturday, but in that general time frame. Brittany had a rhythm to her strategies. Test, withdraw, adjust, advance. It was the rhythm of someone used to winning through wearing people down. I had mapped it across the months I had spent in their house, the small pushes and retreats, the way she would push until you softened, and then push again into the newly softened space. I saw them cross the street from my kitchen window. I had time to set down my coffee, smooth my cardigan, the same navy one, on purpose, and reach the door before they knocked. Daniel was carrying flowers, pale pink dahlias from what I could tell, wrapped in brown paper. Brittany was carrying a paper bag from the French bakery on Morrison Street, the expensive one. They had prepared. "Mom," Daniel said when I opened the door. His smile was the one I recognized from his childhood, the one he used when he had broken something and hoped that hope itself would do the work of accountability. "Can we come in?" I considered it. I could have said no. Patricia would probably have preferred that I say no. But I had learned something important over 68 years of dealing with people. The most revealing thing a person does is what they do when you give them an opening. So I said yes, and I stepped back from the door. We sat in my living room, which by then had taken on its proper character, the reading chair, the framed photograph of Harold and me from our trip to the Oregon coast in 2003, the 2 good lamps that filled the room with warm light. I saw Brittany take in the room as she sat down. I saw the tiny shift in her face, the recalculation as she understood that it was not what she had expected. It was not the room of a woman who was struggling. "We've been thinking a lot," Daniel began. He was sitting forward on the sofa, flowers in his lap. Brittany was beside him, the bakery bag on her knees, her posture open and soft. She had practiced this posture. I could see the practice in it. About everything, about how things went. And I said, "And we want to start over," Daniel said. We want things to be good between us. We're family." He held out the dahlias. I looked at them. I did not reach for them. "Daniel," I said, "I'd like to believe that. What does starting over look like, specifically, in your mind?" He glanced at Brittany. The glance was small and quick, but I had 40 years of reading my son's face, and it told me clearly. She wrote the answer. "It looks like everyone moving forward," Brittany said. Her voice was warm. It was remarkable, the warmth. Not manufactured exactly, but applied, the way you apply a coat of paint to a surface. Not holding on to the past. Not. Her eyes moved briefly around the room, settling on the window that faced their house. Not making choices designed to create discomfort for other people. "I chose a home I loved," I said. "In a neighborhood I had already come to know." "What's discomforting about that?" Brittany's warmth adjusted slightly. "Margaret, I think we both know that living directly across the street from your estranged son and his wife is not a neutral choice." "I'm not estranged from my son," I said. "He's welcome to call me. He left a voicemail 3 weeks ago." I heard it. "You didn't call back," Daniel said. "No," I agreed. "I didn't." A pause. Daniel set the dahlias on the coffee table gently, in what I recognized as a small act of grief. Brittany pressed forward. "What would it take," she said, "for you to consider a different arrangement, something more comfortable for everyone?" "What you're asking me," I said, "is to leave. We're asking you to think about what's best long-term," she said. "At your age, being isolated from your family in a house that's more than you need. At your age," there it was. The velvet scalpel. "I'm not isolated," I said. "I had dinner with Carol Simmons on Thursday. Jim from the corner helped me identify my maple last weekend. Maria's children wave at me every morning when she drops them at the bus stop. I'm less isolated here than I was in your guest room. Brittany's warmth cooled by several degrees. Margaret. She leaned forward just slightly. This situation isn't good for Daniel, for his stress, for his work, there are health effects to ongoing family conflict. For everyone, including you. I looked at her. I let the silence stay for a full 5 seconds, which is a long time when you're sitting in someone's living room. Are you suggesting that my choice of residence is a health risk? I said. To whom? I'm suggesting, Brittany said, each word careful now, that living this way, watching each other across the street, it's not sustainable, and when things aren't sustainable, eventually they fall apart in ways that aren't good for anyone. Daniel had stopped speaking. He was looking at his hands. I have a different view, I said. I think things are quite sustainable. I have a home, I own a business that runs well, neighbors I've grown fond of, and a perfectly clear view of the street, which I find I enjoy. Brittany stood up. The warmth was completely gone now. You're being willfully obstructive, she said. And childish. I'm being a homeowner, I said, which I have been for 37 years. We'll figure something out, she said. It was a threat built into the shape of a sentence. Daniel stood, picked up the dahlias. It was an automatic gesture, a habit, and it told me more than almost anything else that morning had told me. He had not expected to leave with them. He had expected a different result. At the door, he turned. Mom, he said, please. I looked at my son, my boy whom I loved in the way you love something that has caused you your deepest pain and your deepest joy in equal measure, inseparably. And I said, I'll be here, Daniel. I'm not going anywhere. They walked back across the street. I closed my door and stood in my hallway and acknowledged the fear. It was real. Brittany's last sentence had been designed to create it, and it had worked the way a key works in a lock. It found the right mechanism and turned it. But here is what I also knew, standing in my hallway. Fear, when you do not run from it, does not empty you. It fills you. It fills you with the special clarity of someone who understands exactly what is at stake. I went to my desk. I opened my laptop. I wrote a detailed account of that morning's conversation, time, length, exact statements, and emailed it to Patricia. Then I worked for 4 hours straight, and I was very sharp that afternoon. The Block Association meeting had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. Jim organized them every quarter, rotating through neighbors' houses. This one was scheduled for the last Saturday of May at Maria's, which could comfortably fit 12 people in her large kitchen dining room. 7 households were attending. I had marked the date on my calendar the day Carol told me about it. I had not planned a scene. I want to be clear about that. What I had planned was to be present, to be myself, and to be prepared if a scene arrived on its own, which I had reason to believe it might. Daniel and Brittany attended. They arrived a little early, which told me they wanted to establish themselves in the room before I got there. I arrived at the stated time with a lemon pound cake on a plate with a card that said Margaret, number 14, which several people said was a lovely touch. I took a chair at the end of the table near Jim and Sandra. For the first 40 minutes, the meeting was about ordinary things, the pothole on the north end, the question of whether the old Henderson oak needed a city permit before trimming, a plan to organize a summer block party. I listened, spoke once on the question of the oak tree, and watched the room. Brittany was performing well. She was engaged. She laughed at the right moments. She touched Daniel's arm in ways that communicated partnership. She was, as Carol had said, good with the tools. But she had not accounted for Sandra. Sandra had not meant to say anything. She told me this afterward, carefully, over coffee. She truly had not meant to. But the combination of 2 glasses of the white wine Maria had put out and the particular moment that arrived, the moment when Brittany said, in response to a question about the summer block party, it would be so nice for the whole neighborhood to feel like a real community, not just strangers living near each other, was more than Sandra could comfortably hold in. I think community starts with honesty, Sandra said. Her voice was conversational, not pointed. She was looking at her wine glass. About who people are and what they've actually done. The table shifted slightly. These things happen in rooms, small changes in the air, like a drop in pressure. Brittany looked at Sandra. Absolutely, she said smoothly. I've been thinking about that, Sandra continued. Since Margaret moved in across the street, it's an interesting thing. Someone told me Margaret was a woman in financial trouble who needed looking after. And then she bought a house on our street for cash. A quiet moment. Jim said, cash purchase. I said pleasantly. The Harold Ellis Family Trust. Yes. That's significant, Jim said, looking at me with the expression of a man thoroughly rewriting a mental file. Someone told you Margaret was struggling financially? Maria asked Sandra, not aggressively, but with the special directness of a woman who runs a daycare and has no patience for dancing around things. Sandra glanced toward Daniel, not toward Brittany, toward Daniel. It was a small thing, but rooms notice small things. Daniel was looking at the table. I may have repeated something I shouldn't have, he said quietly. Daniel, Brittany said. Her voice was controlled, barely. It wasn't accurate, he said. He said it to the table, not to me. The table was quiet in the way tables go quiet when everyone there has understood something and is waiting to see whether anyone will say it. I said it. I built a business after my husband died, I said. I have been fully supporting myself for 17 years. I mention this not as a point of pride, but because I think it's important for the people on this street to know who their neighbor really is. I paused. There was a period when I was staying with Daniel and Brittany. It ended suddenly in March when I was told to leave. I found a place to stay. I took some time, and I bought this house. That's the whole story. A pause. Maria was looking at Daniel. Jim was looking at his wine glass diplomatically. Brittany said, that is a very selective version of events. Then tell the less selective version, I said. Not with heat. With complete evenness. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. What came out was, you have no right to discuss our family's private. You discuss my finances on this street, I said. You described me as a woman in difficulty, which shaped how my neighbors saw me before I had the chance to introduce myself. I'm simply introducing myself now. You planned this, Brittany said. Her voice rose. You came here tonight to humiliate us. I came here tonight because Jim organized a neighborhood meeting and I live on this street, I said. Brittany, Daniel said. No, she's doing this on purpose, Daniel. She has been doing this on purpose since she moved in here. This is exactly what. Her voice was climbing, and I watched the room watch her climb. And I watched the moment when Brittany understood. I could see it arrive behind her eyes. That she had lost the room. Not to me. To herself. She stopped. The room was very quiet. Jim said gently, maybe we should take a short break. Brittany stood up. She walked out of Maria's house without looking at anyone. Daniel followed her, and at the door he paused and looked back at me. A long, complicated look that I will spend more time understanding in the years ahead than I will spend on almost anything else. Then he went after her. The table sat in silence for a moment. Then Sandra refilled my wine glass. Maria put the plate of cookies in front of me. Jim said, so, the pothole, and the meeting went on. The block association meeting had happened on a Saturday. By Tuesday, it had become, in the quiet way of neighborhoods, a piece of shared knowledge, talked about over back fences and in parked cars and during long front porch conversations. Patricia called on Wednesday. "I want to prepare you for something," she said. "If Daniel and Brittany decide the notarized statement is a legal threat, they may try to file something. Harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, a weak case, but weak cases still take time." "Let them," I said. "You're sure, Patricia?" "I have documentation of a deliberate plan to destroy my housing security. I have a notarized witness statement. I have the timeline of my selling my Boise house running side by side with the timeline of their plan. If they want to put any of this in front of a judge, they are welcome to." They did not file anything. A courthouse is a room where documents become evidence, and Brittany understood that better than Daniel did. Daniel came to my door on Friday evening alone. He looked tired in a way sleep cannot fix. He was not carrying flowers. I made 2 cups of tea. I put one in front of him. I sat across from him. "She didn't know you'd bought the house," he said finally. "She told me it wasn't possible. She said you didn't have that kind of money." "I know she thought that," I said. "She told me you were struggling, that the Boise house sale was, that you were in debt." He stopped. I believed her. "How long did you know about the plan?" I asked. "The October timeline." He looked at the table. "I knew she wanted the room back. I knew it was coming." "I didn't know about October." "But you knew it was coming," I said. "Yes." "And you let it come." "Yes." That was the word I had needed. Not an excuse, not extra background, just yes. "Daniel," I said. "I love you in a way that is not negotiable. You are my son, and that is permanent. But I will not pretend that what was done to me was an accident. It was a plan. Brittany built it, and you agreed to it." "I know." He said, "What happens next between us depends entirely on whether you can be honest about that with me and with yourself. Not on Brittany's timeline. Honestly." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "She's been different lately since the meeting." "That's between you and her," I said. "That's not my chapter." He nodded, thanked me for the tea with the special politeness of someone reaching for a behavior long out of reach, and walked back across the street. What followed came in pieces through Carol and Sandre. Brittany began separating their finances. In June, she consulted a family attorney in the Pearl District, not a couples counselor. The candle business she had named as the reason my room was needed had generated about $1,200 in the previous year. Daniel called me in August and asked if we could have dinner. We went to a small Italian place on Alberta Street and talked for 3 hours. It was not comfortable. It was honest, which is a different and more lasting thing. He paid the bill. I let him. I did not see it as a victory in the usual meaning of that word. Winning against your own son is not something a mother celebrates. But there is another kind of winning, where you refuse to be made small, where you hold on to the record of what is true, even when the people around you insist on a more convenient version. That kind, I claimed completely, without apology and without compromise. A year is enough time for a street to know you. By the following May, 14 Sycamore Lane had become a house. People noticed, not in any grand way, but in the way of a place that is truly lived in and cared for. The front garden was producing tulips in April, then lavender along the walk, then the climbing rose from Jim's cutting that had taken magnificently to the trellis beside the porch. I had put a bench under the maple, and on good mornings I took my first coffee out there before sitting down to work. My business had grown. The disruption of the previous year had, in some sideways way, sharpened my focus. I expanded into teaching small estate dealers how to build their own online systems, which pushed my monthly income well past its old ceiling. I hired a part-time assistant named Priya, exceptionally organized, working remotely from Seattle. Carol and I had dinner every Thursday. Sandra had become a true friend. Dry humor, excellent sourdough, real patience. Jim coordinated the block's seasonal plantings and pulled me in as his co-conspirator, which suited me deeply. Maria's children still waved at me every morning from the bus stop. These were not small things. The morning coffee, the Thursday dinners, the children at the bus stop. These are the real texture of a life. I had rebuilt what I had sold in Boise and built something better. A home that was chosen, a community that knew me as myself. As for the house across the street, Daniel and Brittany separated in August. The hanging fern turned brown, and nobody replaced it. Brittany moved to the Pearl District. The candle business did not go with her. Daniel stayed in the Craftsman house, and he and I had dinner every few weeks through fall and winter. The relationship of two people who had hurt each other and decided honesty was worth more than pretending otherwise. He started seeing a therapist and told me so directly. On his birthday, I made the German chocolate cake Harold had always made. He ate 2 slices and, for the first time in a long time, looked like my boy. There were evenings when I sat under the maple in the last of the light and felt something I can only describe as settled, not triumphant. Settled. I was 69 years old, in a house owned outright, with a business running beautifully, a street full of people who knew my name, and a pothose in the kitchen window with 17 new leaves. Harold, I sometimes thought, look at what your careful woman built. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. Share this story, subscribe, and thank you for listening, dear friends.